It is the Open University of the Airwaves. There are no tuition fees, and you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. It is a unique show, at least in the Anglosphere, and it has the biggest audience of any similar show in the Anglosphere. I say biggest, I don't just mean on the internet, though it definitely is that. But it beats the flagship programs of Sky and BBC and GB News and all the others into a cocked hat. It is watched by people in North America, in Australasia, in South Africa, in India, in Abu Dhabi, in Saudi Arabia, and of course in Britain and Ireland and across Europe. Anyone who can understand English is increasingly tuning in to the mother of all talk shows. And so the argument about whether a midweek mother of all talk shows could be sustained became OTOs. We proved that with the mom and pop television, no budget TV of the Galloway show, made just by Gayatri and me in our back room, when our audiences were reaching sometimes 75% of the audience of the mothership, the mother of all talk shows itself. But listen in for the nuggets. We are sponsored for the first hour of this show, for the first month at least, by Critical Cosmetics, which, as far as I can see, is as unique as the mother of all talk shows itself. It's a passion project by a man, Ravi, that you'll meet later. It's his birthday, by the way. I hope you'll all wish him the very happiest of birthdays. What a way to celebrate his birthday by becoming the first ever commercial sponsor of the mother of all talk shows. His company that makes Critical Cosmetics and many other things and is about to launch foods and ingredients and all kinds of other paraphernalia is just about as green a company as it is possible to imagine. And a portion of their profits goes directly into regenerating native environments that were partially, if not completely, destroyed when globalized capitalism took control of them, wrung them of every cent of profit and left them in a state of ruin. As I say, we'll be talking to Ravi in the second hour, but the first hour is wholly sponsored by him. But the second hour isn't sponsored yet at all, although there are many leads, there are many discussions going on. And we hope next week that we will have, if not then the week after that, we will have the second hour sponsored. As long as it isn't sponsored, it needs to be sponsored by you. And the way to do that on YouTube is to go to the super chat mechanism and make a donation of £1, $1, or €1. They're all worth more or less the same now. Not that much need for calculation. Maybe that was an accident. Maybe it was design. But give us one. That's all I'm asking for. I'm worth one, right? I'm worth £1, €1, or $1. Of course, if you can afford to give more, please do. But please, give £1, give $1, give €1. As long as we don't have a sponsor for the second hour. You don't have to sponsor the whole hour. You can be a part sponsor of the second hour. You can even sponsor my cup, which would mean I'd have a better one to drink my tea out of. No disrespect to my missus, it's from the Netherlands. It could have been a clog, but it's a windmill cup. You can get in touch with us and find ways that your products, your services, can be shouted out and displayed on the screen of a show with a gigantic worldwide audience. There's so much to talk about tonight. I was going to dedicate this show to Tulsi Gabbard, fragrant, beautiful, brilliant, brave, who left the so-called Democratic Party this week in a stentorian address that might well be a precursor to her running for president in 2024. Personally, I hope so. If not in concert with someone else, as a running mate maybe of Donald Trump, as a running mate of Bernie Sanders, if Bernie could get off his ass and leave the poisoned environment of the US Democratic Party, they'd be quite a good double act. Tulsi Gabbard is brave and brilliant. She is a serving reserve military officer. No peacenik her. She cannot be outflanked by people who dodged the draft, never went anywhere near Vietnam or any of the other wars that they sent other people's sons into. Tulsi Gabbard left the Democratic Party in a hail of shot and shell aimed by her at them. She called them a party of warmongers, a party of the elite. She is the woman, of course, who called for the release and the pardoning by Donald Trump of Julian Assange in the last days of his presidency, saying that the persecution of Assange was a threat to freedom of speech and to the freedom of the press for all Americans. She did not succeed then, but she has not changed her mind and continues to be amongst the very few frontline American politicians campaigning for the freedom of Julian Assange. She's the woman who, in what I described as the tweet of all time, and it still holds that title so far as I am concerned, when she denounced Hillary Clinton as a warmonger in words that Shakespeare himself would have been proud of. Look it up if you don't believe me. But I'm not going to. There are many differences I have with Tulsi Gabbard and many more that she has with me. So I don't want to be a monkey on her back. So I'm not dedicating this show to Tulsi Gabbard. I'm dedicating it instead to Matthew White, whom I've never met, to the best of my knowledge, and who lives in North America, but who told me today that he listened to the very first mother of all talk shows on TalkSport Radio in 2006 and has listened to and now watched every single edition since. In all those years, he has not missed a single edition. So Matthew, this one is for you. Now, they said on Sky News just before I sat down that at the 1822 committee, it's really the 1922 committee, but it might as well be the 1822 committee, which is the body of Conservative members of Parliament, there was a great deal of banging on the desks at the end of the address given to them by Liz Truss, at the moment the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Now, the banging might have been knuckles on wood in approbation, or it might have been heads on wood, as the collective members of the Parliamentary Conservative Party beat their heads in exasperation at how they managed to find the stupidest woman in England to be their leader and Britain's Prime Minister. One of them told Sky News on the way out, "She's cardboard, isn't she? We just have to live with it." The Sky News reporter said, "But can she win you the next election?" And the Conservative grandee said, "Oh no, we're not going to win the next election. We're F you know the rest," as Joe Biden would say. The Conservatives have plunged Britain into economic and political crisis. I was watching last night the Kenneth Branagh docudrama called This England, I think, about the premiership of Boris Johnson. The first episode makes it clear that he did have quite a bit of bad luck coming into office. Just as Brexit was being done, the first waves of the coronavirus pandemic began lapping at his feet. But thereafter, he made blunder after blunder after blunder, and he and his administration committed crime after crime after crime. I mean crime. I mean high crimes and misdemeanors, for which one day I hope they will appear in court before the justice system. But the one thing I would have to say is that Boris Johnson was not made of cardboard. Boris Johnson was a real flesh and blood person. Boris Johnson was a person of substance and weight, a person who could fight his way out of a corner because he had the erudition, he had the vocabulary, he had the historical memory to make you forget about what it was he was being attacked for in the first place. Liz Truss can do none of that. She can hardly bite her nails. As I said on Sunday, if she walked into the town hall in Cleethorpes, Lancashire, and claimed to be a member of the local council, nobody would believe her. They'd think she was a madwoman that wandered in off the street. She is now the British Prime Minister, at least for now, because the Tories are thinking about getting rid of her already, less than 60 days after her installation as the Prime Minister of Britain. They might even turn back to Boris Johnson. Do you know what? They might even do worse than turning back to Boris Johnson. At least we'd have something to laugh about as we went down, slipped down below the waves. But of course, the two big stories that we are focusing on tonight concern our two new enemies. I speak as a citizen of Great Britain. I'm even wearing its flag, in case you thought it was a Russian one or a French one, even more unlikely. I am British. What happens to Britain and the British matters to me more than what happens anywhere else to anyone else. And so I regard aghast the situation that occurred today, where, thanks to a leak to that well-known geopolitical journal, Rupert Murdoch's Sun, we discover that Britain has officially designated China as a threat to the United Kingdom. A threat to the United Kingdom means an enemy of the United Kingdom. That's why I entered it that way in the poll that I've got running. Is China an enemy of the UK? I'm astonished that so far more than a quarter of the respondents think China is an enemy of the UK. I hope they'll have the courage to call the show tonight and explain why they think that. But the designation of China as an enemy of the United Kingdom means that we have left the European Union, slipped anchor from a 28-member union, which guaranteed us, if not friends, at least allies, up to a point. And we have sailed off into a sea, having declared both of the great Eurasian powers our enemies. We are at war with Russia, and now we have designated China as an enemy state. How different things were just a few years ago when David Cameron and George Osborne declared a golden age in Anglo-Sino relationships. So golden that George Osborne took a super remunerative role in a hedge fund and a venture capitalist outfit that was doing great business in China. Maybe that's what they meant by the golden age. How different now. 8 years ago it was a golden age. Now China is an enemy. Official. Reported in Rupert Murdoch's gutter press before Parliament was told about it. But what does it mean now? How do we hope we, a country with a total armed forces, Air Force, Navy, Army, whose entire armed forces could fit into a mid-level football stadium in England, Villa Park, for example. Definitely the Riverside, the stadium of that giant football club, Middlesbrough. How does it work that a tiny little country whose economy is broken, whose lights are going out, whose inflation is rampant, whose recession is upon us, before the winter has even begun, levels of fuel poverty never seen before in this country. People are out. I live in the countryside. People are out cutting firewood. They better not be caught cutting down my firewood, because I'm going to need it for myself and my own household. In Germany, there's a whole industry of people out there cutting down trees. How environmentally friendly we've become. You can smell the methane released by the terrorist act of blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines. You can smell it from space. It was revealed this week. It is wonderful, isn't it? These hypocrites. It's only yesterday they were in Glasgow at the COP conference, weeping because we didn't go far enough in halting industrialization. For other people, we're already industrialized. In paving the entire world green, of banning the use of coal. South Africa was bribed by Germany to stop producing coal. Germany is now buying South African coal. How does it work that this England, this sceptred isle, can make an enemy simultaneously without any historical understanding of Napoleon, never mind Hitler, of fighting a war on two fronts against two hypersonically armed thermonuclear powers? Perhaps we think that China means us some harm. I presume that's what they mean by threat, but China has never done us any harm. We, on the other hand, have done plenty of harm to China, including this supremely stupid designation of China as a threat today. I've left the Russia-Ukraine subject to the end of my monologue because the next guest knows the subject even better than mine. So let me just say that last Sunday I predicted that the next morning a hard rain was going to fall, that the sky would be blacked out with a cloud of missiles and rockets that would be raining down on the infrastructure of Ukraine, 6 months after the start of a war in which Russia has deliberately tied one hand behind its back and the other hand is still wearing velvet gloves. But the gloves came off, as I predicted on Monday. The battlefield changed. The war changed. The exaltation about the terror attack on the Kerch Bridge was left tasting like ashes in the mouths of those who had been exulting. Happy birthday, Mr. President. The Ukrainian government laughed, but they're not laughing now. In fact, they might not even be in Ukraine now. If they are in the bowels of the earth now. No more glad, confident morning for the coup regime in Kiev, glorying in its financial and military largesse from the richest countries in the world, in the European Union and in North America. The tide has turned. And who better to tell us about it than my guest right after this break, Scott Ritter, the former US Marine intelligence officer and sage, seer of all he surveys in the field of warfare. Stay tuned.